Hey, this is Jake. Thank you for clicking on this episode of Decision Space. Before we jump into the show, I just want to let you know that this episode's a little bit different. I was very fortunate to be able to record live in person with a couple of very good friends about our shared passion of kickball. So if the audio quality isn't as great as normal, I apologize for that. I did the best I could. I think it is very listenable. Also, there's at least one curse word that slipped through, so please be aware of that. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to Decision Space, the only podcast that takes place between the turns in your favorite games. My name's Jake, and today I'm joined by two co-hosts, Angela Finch and Simon Skinner. As previously mentioned on another podcast, two of the best kickball players in the world.
Maybe Angela, not me.
Today we're going to talk all about kickball and the decisions therein. Let's just start out by maybe our guests can introduce themselves a little bit, and I guess if they want to refute the best kickball player in the world title, that's on them, but I would disagree with that.
So I started playing kickball as an adult in 2005. Although I remember maybe going to South Park 2004 and playing on a team. But 2005, I played for Mad Greek. Just a friend of mine worked there, and he was like, "Hey man, you want to come play kickball?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Showed up to South Park. It was on grass. Had a great time. Kicked some home runs, and then left. So I've played since then. I played on that team for 6 years, and then in 2012, I changed teams to Wildman, won a championship with that team, and have been on that team ever since. And we've had 2 championships, and we've been in 3 total.
And that's in the Lawrence, Kansas, Kaw Valley Kickball League, which we're all partial to, and all 3 of us play in. And then you've also done a little bit of travel ball too, right? You won at least one kind of mixed tournament?
I've never won a tournament in 365. The furthest I've gone is on an availables team, which is like when you kind of mix players from different teams. I made it to the Final Four.
But can kick.
Yeah. Yeah. I had really long hair back then, and I hit it was like a grand slam or something.
It was
maybe
a grand slam, I think.
And
someone on the other field.
People were like, "Who's that chick that?"
They're like, "That chick can kick."
So yeah, that's my claim to fame for that. But I was on the coaching staff for one of Angela's teams that have won a championship.
Yeah,
so yeah,
that counts.
Awesome. Yeah. And definitely one of the players here in this league that probably strikes the most fear into the hearts of outfielders.
For sure.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Angela, how about you?
I started playing kickball in my adult life in, I think it was 2013. I'm having a hard time remembering how many years I was on Channel 6 to start. But I believe it was 4 or 5 seasons. And then I joined Love Garden with Jake for a season, which was awesome. I learned a lot from him. And now this is my second season with third season, with Kansas Tree Care. And then I also do traveling kickball as well. And we do have a women's league, so it's all women instead of doing like local here, it's just co-ed. So I have 4 women's championships and a lot of Final Fours and Elite Eights for co-ed and women's.
That's a lot of rings. And I know you just recently got back from Denver a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And did win that tournament?
Yes, we did win. So that was the first one since I'm back-to-back now in tournaments. So San Diego in 2020, right before everything shut down, and then Denver 2021. Won both of those. So
that's awesome. And for people who are not tuned in to the national kickball circuit, these are really competitive tournaments with people flying in from all over the country, super teams of available players, and it's something crazy to see. So to win so many is insanely impressive from where I'm sitting. And for myself, I've been playing in this Cobb Valley Kickball League since, I think 1 year maybe before you, Angela. I think 2012 was my first year. I played on the worst team in the league, the Astro Kitty Comics Space Pussy, as we were called. Yeah. I was clerking at the comic book store at the time and found my way onto that team. We didn't win a game, but had a lot of fun. I was recruited to a better team the year after that, as is tradition for a lot of the kind of lower tier teams. And I've been playing on Love Garden ever since, taking, I guess, 1 year off last year. I only played one game. And this year, thanks to remote work and I guess just my own kind of insanity, I've almost been commuting back and forth from St. Louis for like about half of the games.
That's commitment.
And it's been a lot of fun. All right, so what we do on the Decision Space podcast, which I'm sure you guys are big fans of and listen every week, so you already know, we like to give the games that we review a rating out of 10, and then we do a little slogan. If you didn't prepare a slogan, don't worry about it. But let's see. Let's start. Angela, do you want to give us your rating for Kickball out of 10?
My rating for Kickball is 10 out of 10, and I mean, I don't know how many people would just stand in line to pay to play Kickball, but when we travel around for circuit, and I mean, even the local league, I think there's, some fees to play. I think it's a big deal. I mean, I love playing. I've met so many people, and it's become such a big part of who I am and my identity, and being able to continue to be competitive, post a competitive, career in track and field and other sports. So I love it. There's ups and downs, but like with anything, there's going to be. What about you, Simon?
I mean, yeah, I give it a 10 out of 10. I think that's a lot in part due to how great KVKL is. Mm-hmm. People don't know there's 36 teams. I mean, that gives you over 400 friends instantly, basically, or 400 people that you know. They might be your enemies. I don't know. But it's a very good community thing here. I think it's unique. There might be some leagues that are similar as far as rules and maybe community, but ours has to be the biggest by far. As far as its impact on the community.
I would agree. I mean, when I was in Denver, Lou, my boyfriend, he drove back so that he could play local league, and a lot of the people playing, and watching the next day, they were like, "Where'd Lou go?" I said, "Well, you went back to play local league," and everyone was like, "Why? Why would you drive back and not stay in Denver and go play in local league?" And I think people don't understand how big the community is and what kind of weight it has, and also. I posted a video of the game of the week, and I got messages from 4 different kickball leagues asking when they could host a tournament, a traveling circuit tournament, or TNS in Lawrence, because they look at that and they see, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's that many people that play kickball in one city. So I think it really impressed people on a national level that I talked to saw that.
Totally. Yeah. Just hearing y'all talk about KVKL and how special it truly is, gives me chills, because I just love it so much. And I'm gonna give my rating for Kickball. I'm gonna sweep it with a 10. That makes Kickball officially the highest rated game on the Decision Space podcast.
Wow.
I love board games and sitting around a table, playing with friends, having that great kind of interaction, but to do that on a field where you've got 15 people in each dugout, you're all engaging in the same kind of thing. It's just such a heightened experience. And, to have the mental aspects of it that we'll talk about here in a second, but also to bring in the physical aspects of can you execute your plans through your physical ability? It just makes it such a heightened experience for me. So I love it. I really have a hard time of thinking about anything that I would really rather be doing than playing kickball.
For sure.
Agreed.
Did you want me to read
my
review?
Let's hear the slogan.
Okay, so I came up with a slogan since Jake asked me to. So, Kickball. Visually stunning and action-packed, adult kickball is a perfect dichotomy of entertainment and cringiness. with its flawed, often self-appointed heroes and misunderstood villains. You'll be left both discouraged and hopeful by its reflection of human nature.
That's beautiful, man.
Thank you.
So, the reason I wanted to bring the sport of kickball into this kind of space that's primarily been about tabletop gaming is partly because I love it, I'm passionate about it, but also partly because as I engage in kind of the tabletop gaming space, you see a lot of people like throwing around like the terms like sports ball and kind of like disparaging, even going as far as like disrespecting people who really enjoy playing sports. And I think that kind of, maybe goes back to like middle school or high school, like kind of like nerds versus jocks mentality, which is definitely going away over time, fortunately, which is good. But I think that kind of lingers out there. And just for me personally, I've always loved playing sports, and I've loved, like growing up, I played soccer super competitively and Magic the Gathering super competitively at the same time, and really viewed those things kind of on the same spectrum of games. And I really think you can sort of trace, a through line from a board game like Settlers of Catan, maybe to like a video game where you're doing a strategy game and you're incorporating some amount of like muscle memory, like with your fingers, and there's some athleticism there. And then to like something like pool, which is like a strategy game, maybe involving more of your body, straight on down to track and field or basketball or baseball. So I had the idea, we talk a lot about in board games about like gateway games, like what's a game you can introduce your friends and families to maybe get them intrigued with trying board games as something they might like. And so I was thinking like, I think kickball might be the perfect gateway sport for somebody who maybe didn't grow up playing a lot of sports, but might be interested in it. So that's sort of the frame that I want to go into this conversation with, is kind of thinking about, how might somebody who's familiar with games on like the tabletop side of things kind of be brought into the world of sports and have fun playing kickball, even without that background. So that was sort of my concept, and I really appreciate y'all for joining me for this conversation.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I think that, kickball derives most of its, strategy from baseball. And baseball really is like, has to be one of the nerdiest like sports balls, think about that movie Moneyball. Was all about this statistician who was just like, he basically solved the game by like just looking at the numbers, and baseball is like such a strategy game. And I think kickball, it carries over to kickball. You got to play all 9 innings, and it's like you mentioned video games like Battletoads, man. Like once you lose your life, like you're done, and like so you have to each inning you have to keep progressing, and it's just so hard to get past that hump, if you're trying to beat a top team or win a championship,
Absolutely. And did you know, this is just a random Lawrence fact, but the guy who invented sabermetrics baseball lives in Lawrence, from Lawrence?
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Is he still here?
He's still here, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
My dad actually, this is a super random tangent, but interesting. My dad he dropped out of high school and worked in like a bean canning factory. And he said it was like a great job because like they could basically like do whatever they want and like mess around. Like him and his friends worked there because the guy who was like in charge of supervising them like wasn't ever paying attention to the cameras. He was just like doing like baseball statistics all day. It was that guy.
That's so
awesome.
Isn't
that crazy?
Yeah, that's
crazy.
Awesome. You should have invited him.
Yeah, we'll get him on the next one. So let's kind of transition into our main topic and sort of talk about some of the decisions in kickball. So let's start with kind of the defensive side of the ball. So I have a discussion question for y'all, and it's just, what is the most interesting decision you find yourself making when you're playing defense?
Well, I think on, when you're looking at a team or you're captaining a team, you look at, where is the best position for individuals, but also how does that work as the full team? The person that you put at catcher may not be your best catcher, do you put them somewhere else because it's more advantageous? So, and you can make that comparison at any level. So, you know, from a coaching standpoint, looking at how I'm forming my defense, that's one of the biggest things I'm looking at. And before you came in, we had kind of discussed how the emergence of having male pitchers on teams has been a kind of a shift, because in the past it seems like some teams would put a female pitcher there and choose to put a male pitcher somewhere else that they might think this might be better for. And Simon mentioned that he's seen kind of a shift in how some positions have been more important than others, you know, and depending on the teams you're playing, that could change.
Totally. That's really interesting. And I think we can maybe come back to that a little bit later, but one of the questions my friend Aurora asked in the Discord, she posed some questions, and one was like, is kickball kind of solved? And I think sort of thinking about how baseball is typically, you always see the same formations, more or less. Teams are playing the same thing. We've, you know, over hundreds of years have sort of come to this conclusion that this is the best type of defense. And kickball, like you're pointing out, is there's so much room to innovate. And, you know, even in the 10 years I've been playing in this league, you know, you see historically female positions turn into more male-dominated positions, or you know, in positions where people 10 years ago had been like, oh, we're never going to put our female player at first base. It's too important. It's like now you're seeing more and more people doing that. And so it's definitely, I think there's a lot of space for innovation on how you set up your defense.
Right.
Yeah, and I say, like, you know, with baseball, what I have seen in recent years, though, is they do that shift now, the defensive shift. So if they have a person who they just know statistically hits to one side of the field, they'll double up on that side. And with kickball, it's even more important. I just remember playing a game against one of the other top teams, and the wind was just blowing so far out into right
this
field.
This year we played you.
Oh yeah, So I'm trying to think though. I don't think we shifted because there was one game where you
put your rover behind one.
Well, we put our rover behind one.
Yeah.
But one time our rover, we made Richard our rover. So one of our most athletic guys, we had to put him in rover, but behind first base, just because all the balls were just going to the same side of the field.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, rover is like a 10th defensive position on kickball that historically people kind of play behind third base, because the third base person in kickball is often running up to field bunts. So it kind of gives you a little bit of coverage there.
Right.
Both really interesting points. I was thinking, for me, I typically play in the outfield. And the thing I find most interesting on decision is, like, where do I position myself? Because there's such a risk versus reward where, you know, if you're too far back, you know, you could back up as far as you want, and you can guarantee, nobody's going to kick a ball over your head, basically. But that's enabling teams, and especially good teams who are capable of taking advantage of it, to drop balls in front of you, for single after single after single. So trying to, get that risk versus reward just right, where I'm playing as pushed up as possible without giving up the big, home run kick over my head, is something that I find really challenging and, really interesting, and, something, definitely a decision I'm grappling with every time I play a game, depending on the person. If Simon's up, I'm going back there. But, if somebody else, maybe it's if it's just somebody I don't know, but it's just like an athletic looking person, where do you play?
Yeah, I feel like if there's no wind, I tend to play up, because, if they can kick it over your head, it's a rubber ball filled with air. So it's just like, if it's going to go over your head, it's probably going to float a little bit. And if you're fast enough, if you just turn around and start running, there's a chance you can probably catch that. Whereas if they're nickeling and diming you by dropping in front, you can make those plays where you can just run in on it and catch it if you play shallow.
Yeah, I think about the same thing. And also, there's an element of difficulty in the execution of, even if you're too far up and somebody's trying to kick it over your head, there's like a pretty decent chance they're just going to pop it up too high, where, I feel like sometimes, especially against less experienced teams, you can really bait people into like the big kicks.
We, our team would do that. We would actually switch me and put me at center field if there was no one on, and bait that kicker to kick to me. Because a lot of times,
Right.
they're not going to be able to execute and kick it over my head. If they do, it's a single or whatever.
Or they might even think like, oh, it's a girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So we've
Little do
definitely
they
done
know.
that in the past.
Do you guys think about changing your defensive position based on like the opposing kicker in situation? Is that something you're thinking about as you're playing a game?
100%. So sometimes it's situational, like just like where they're at in their lineup, regardless of who is up. So if they have a runner on first and no outs, I usually, want to put a bump block up there. I'll move my second baseman up. I don't usually shift my rover over because I don't want to give up that chip over third base. But I'll usually push my second baseman forward for that short kick up first base. But then also when you play a lot, you just know personnel, so you know what their tendencies are.
Mm-hmm.
So like Sarah Riley's on, my team, and I've just seen her play so often. So when I play against her in City League, I'm just like, I know exactly where to put the defense, and usually we shut her down pretty well,
Right.
So
Especially with the teams at kind of the top of the KVKL that are playing against each other year after year,
Right.
It becomes like a pretty small pool of players,
Mm-hmm.
and people, you get the scouting report for sure.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
So when I think another decision that comes into playing kickball. So this is like, think about yourself on the field. So the question comes up like where to throw the ball, right? And I think, obviously you want to throw a ball to first base if nobody's on to get the force out, or second base, maybe if you have a runner on first and second. But I think the question becomes a lot more challenging and complex at times because of like a risk versus reward element, right? Do you take the easy out at first base, or do you maybe try a more difficult throw that you practice less often to get the advanced runner, right? To get the person who's running to third. Do you guys want to take a stab at kind of talking about that, or is that something you think about before the kick, or something you're kind of thinking through on the fly?
Yeah, and I think this happens, I would say, less in KVKL. I think of that more in like the traveling league where it's more of a bunters league, because it's easier to kind of shift players around and say, all right, you're gonna come up first base line and then go for that at 3. But it is a really risky play because if you don't get that out, you've got bases loaded, right? If you do get that out, you got that out, and you don't have runners on, just 2 and 3, which is what it would have been if you just
Right.
threw 1. So, there's definitely risk and reward, and I wouldn't make that decision just on the fly with anyone. It would definitely have to be someone who I knew could execute, and
But like if you're playing,
me.
let's say you're playing second base, right? And
Right.
you're fielding the ball coming, it's kind of kicked to you at second,
Yeah.
right? And
would I ever throw it to 3?
Well, I mean, like, let's say
Probably
you have a for sure out at 1,
Yeah.
Mhm.
or you're like, I think I might be able to turn and get the out at 2.
Okay.
Like, how do you do? Is that something you're just like
Yeah.
thinking through on the fly, or
it's,
ahead of time?
It's something ahead of time that I think about. So, and that comes to positioning. So if like I play more shortstop this year, but like when I'm going really, really shallow, for instance, when no one's on base, so that I can potentially throw that person out, because the further back I am, I'm not going to be able to throw them out. And so the same thing, if I were playing second base, if I wanted to go for the lead runner, I would kind of position my body to be going toward that base, right? So if they did kick it between me and that base, it would, there's more space for me to grab it and then go to that
Right.
base. So it's definitely a decision that I make beforehand. I would say it's pretty predictable that I'm not making decisions on the fly.
Mhm.
I think when you do make those decisions and they pay off, like the high risk ones, you feel good about it, but still at the same time, I think, I really shouldn't have done that. Even though it worked
Yeah.
out. Like there was a play I had recently where I was playing right field, and the first baseman was just like throw me the ball, because the person wasn't to first yet. But like I knew they had a runner on third, and I knew that person was a slower runner, so I just threw it home, and so they were able to tag him, and it worked out. But in retrospect, it's just like, just get the out. It was the third out, you know, just get the fourth out. Like, what was I thinking?
Well, yeah, in that case.
In that case.
That was just me, you know, like in the game where I didn't make the decision. I mean, it's better to make the decision before the play happens. Like, if this happens, I'm going here. If this happens, I'm going here. But it was more of just like, oh, I'm going to go throw this person.
Yeah,
out.
I think there's definitely something to, like, the execution is easier if it's in your head what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Definitely.
as soon as you're processing something different, you're, like, recalibrating your body. I think that comes up a lot, like, in kicking, where I feel like my worst kicks, my biggest mistakes, I'm, like, in my head, I'm like, I'm going to kick it to right field or whatever. And then just the way the ball comes in, I'm like, actually, I'm going to pull this down, like, the left field line. And, you know, somehow in that translation in my brain, it's just going to go straight up in the air almost every time.
Yeah.
I think my like personal ideology about kickball, and this is especially in KVKL, is like I generally want the sure out. If it's like a 90, you know, if it's 100% to get the out at first and a 75% chance to get the lead runner at second, like I'd almost still rather just get the out at one.
Yeah.
And that's because like the team that I play on Love Garden and kind of our ideology like lately has been more of like an offensive focus, right? So I don't care, even if we give up like a run, you know, 1 or 2 runs, you know, every other inning or something, like I still feel like because of our offense, we should be able to like get them back. What we can't afford is to give up like 5 or 6 runs in the inning because we don't get the out, and now we have like bases loaded.
And that's situationally too. You know, the more you play, the more you can kind of see like, you know, you're not going to do that, and like you're not going to let them score in the bottom of the 9th, right? So if it's a tie game, you know, you're not going to let them score. And same, it's like if it's a close game and you're really, really working for runs and it's a high defensive game, like you make different decisions. Right. And I think that those are made before the play happens. Is you're like, we're going to hold this runner and kind of decide as a team, whoever's getting it, we're not letting them score. Yeah, and I think like kind of the comparison here to like board game is, you know, like so we're talking about like executing a play after we've made a decision. There's nothing that's like a 1-to-1 comparison to that in a board game besides like if you're playing a dexterity game like pool, right? That would be kind of a 1-to-1 comparison where you're like, okay, I'm going to try and like knock this ball into that one. That's my plan. And then you do it or you don't. I do think it can kind of come up in other games, like I mentioned Magic the Gathering earlier, and I think sometimes like the board in that game can get so complicated with so many like complex interactions that like your capacity to think through enough steps, like your brain's bandwidth for it becomes limited. And at a certain point you're like, okay, well I think this checks out, so I'm just like going to start doing it, and then you kind of get to the end of that sequence of actions and it's like, did it happen or not? That's kind of like, you know, for the people who are board gamers listening, like I think that's kind of the comparison to this like execution. And if you can think through that line clearly, like, okay, I get the ball, I throw it to first base, like your chance of completing it's going to be better than if you're thinking about it on the fly. Right. Anything else kind of on the defensive end? This is a really interesting one. I almost forgot. Like throwing the ball at players is maybe like the thing that's like most unique to kickball, and it's a super high risk reward situation because there are situations that come up in kickball if there's not a force on a runner where your only chance at getting them out is by literally pegging them with the ball, throwing it at them, and hitting them.
Right. I mean, a recent game was against Muddy, and that's how the game ended. Was one of their players, Ao, he's a great player. I think he was at first, and he had to really kind of go deep to get the ball, like on the edge of the grass. And instead of like throwing to first, I think he realized he couldn't make that throw. He just like threw it at Colin Key, who's very, very fast, running to second. Just tossed it at him, and it just barely clipped his heel, and that ended the game. You know, it would have been like we probably would have scored a run off of that. And then, so it's one of those things where that's very high risk, high reward. You know, if he had missed him, he would have been like, what was I thinking?
Yeah. It's definitely just playing the game. It's a play that goes wrong more than it goes right.
And it's usually impulse. Like you can't predict that you're going to be in the situation to where you can just throw the ball at someone. That just happens at random. And you either decide you're going to do it or not.
Yeah, you're never, like, to just go back to our previous conversation, you're never thinking they're waiting for the ball. Like, I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to throw it at that person.
Right. Yeah.
Right? That's never kind of in your head.
Well, especially if, like, they have runners in front of them, you know, on the base path. And, you know, even if you do hit them, if there's, like, 1 out or 0 outs, if you hit them, that ball could fly anywhere. And then it's just like all those other people are going to score, even the ones behind them, you know? So... yeah, it's always smarter to throw it to the bag.
Yeah, it's almost always smart, but there are situations that like the best, most optimal play, to use like a board game term, is to make that crazy, risky throw. And I just think, like, that's honestly, like, I'm so glad that's a part of the game.
Right.
Like, I would never want it to be, like, removed,
illegal,
even if I almost never want somebody on my team to go for it.
I know.
Yeah.
Oof.
All right, well, let's move on to sort of offense, kind of kicking the ball and some of the decisions going to that. So let's just start with the obvious one. Where do you kick it? So, Angela, I'll start with you. Like, what kind of thought process, what's going through your head to help you decide, like, what kind of kick or bunt you're going to try and execute?
Well, usually, you know, if I have, if my teammates, I kick second. So if my teammate's on first base, like, I'm almost always in a bunt.
Right.
Because that's why I'm at the 2-hole. And a lot of times I think about, you know, I could bunt up 1, I could bunt down 3. So bunting up 1's going to keep it away from Alex usually, and going to guarantee that he's going to make it to 2. And sometimes I think, like, well, he's faster and I think that he's going to get there. And so I kind of read the defense. A lot this year, it's ended on me having to lead off. And so I always make that decision of, okay, am I going to, you know, bunt in this situation where they know I'm going to bunt, or should I try to just kick a single? And, you know, what are my odds of getting on base if I just kick away instead? So that's usually in the lineup what I end up having to do. It's not too fancy. It's usually the same thing, but...
yeah, I mean, I think you play to your strengths and your comfortability. Like, I think I had my first bunt this season in the game of the week, and it worked out for me. But usually I kick because I just feel like I can hit the gap. So, you know, you talk about a game being solvable. All things equal, if you have a perfect defense versus a perfect offense, the perfect offense wins every time because you can hit those gaps, and it's physically impossible for the best defender to get there.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, for me, if you are confident in your gap kicking, I don't know. For me, that's the better choice than bunting.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I feel the same way. Like, I think there are kind of 3 competing factors that go into it. Like the situation, right? Like you point out, Angela, like, where are your people on the bases? If you have somebody on first base, like, you don't want to kick it to second base, right? Because even if they get out of second, that's no good. The personnel on defense, like, sometimes you just know, you know, keep it away from that girl, keep away from that guy. They're gonna catch it every time or make the play every time. So, you know, if one side of the field you think is weaker than another, that could come into it for me. And then, what am I most comfortable with as a player? For me, I guess, like, Simon, I've just found that, like, you know, people have always, like, it seems like bunting, I always see people execute it and it does so well, and then when I try it, it just doesn't go as good, and I'm always like, why didn't I just kick? Like, you know, I'm good at kicking. I can kick it to the spot I want most of the time.
Right.
So more and more, you know, I've just tried to be less fancy, more of just, like, kicking a hard driven ball on the ground to the spot I want, because that's kind of like what I'm good at. And I'll kind of use that over the situation, even if the situation's like bunting, I might still just be like, I'm going to go ahead and just try.
Right?
Yeah.
It's one of those things as a captain, you're like, don't ever do that, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? Like, as far as bunting, it's like, if there's no
like,
outs,
this is a bunt situation.
Yeah, this is a bunt situation. And I can answer that question for you as far as, like, why would you bunt instead of kicking? It's just because, you know, it's a rubber ball. It can hit any kind of bump. If you miss kick a power kick, I mean, that's like, you could, you know, get a double play off of it. You know, you hit it right to the third baseman. He just tags the base. Whereas a bunt, at least you're putting the ball, you have more of a chance of putting the ball in play and it hitting the ground. And so your runners know the ball's hit the ground so I can run. You know what I mean? Whereas if you hit in the air at any point, your runners are like, can I
Yeah.
go yet or not, you know?
I always tell my team, like, keep getting the ball on the ground is like getting the ball over the net in volleyball.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
you have to execute that to have any chance
Yeah.
of success. And like once you've done that, you know,
It's out of
no
your
matter how
hands.
poorly it is kicked, like it could be like right to the other person, like slowly or smoothly on the ground, they can easily pick it up. Like at least like you're forcing them to make a play
Yeah.
as opposed to just like running underneath it and having it land in their arms, which is like, you know, even if it goes really far into the outfield, if somebody's there, it's still the easiest thing in the world just to catch it.
Did you ever experience this on Space Pussy, like where you had players who would like kick it really far and your teammates would be like, oh, that was a great kick, but it would just be caught out on the outfield. And it's like, no, that's not a great kick. Like, if it's an easy catchable ball, like just because the ball goes far, I mean, you literally accomplished nothing. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I do see that. And I think I see it like more even in like competitive teams because, and probably not at this point in the season, but like just the way the KBKL is structured, you play, if you're one of the top 2 or 3 best teams, like Angela's team and Simon's team, you play a bunch of teams in the first 5 weeks of the season that are just not even close to your level of competition. So a lot of those like big long kicks work really well,
right?
Because you know the defenders just don't know how to read the ball in the air, and they're just not getting there. And then all of a sudden, at a halfway point in the season, the KBKL switches it up, so you're playing, if you win your division, all the other teams that won their division.
Right.
And like all of a sudden, like none of those things are landing.
Yeah.
So you know, I remember I was watching the Johnnies versus Harpies game, and that was maybe like week 1 or 2 of the pool play, and they were just, both these teams were just like popping it up in the air like over and over, like big, long, deep kicks, you know. Like, wow, like very impressive.
Well,
and just like all of them getting caught.
I was talking to Simon about this before you came in. It was, you know, we were actually playing Johnny's, and a comment that one of their players had said after playing us, they were really disappointed in their offense, and they were like, you know, I don't understand, like we've been kicking well all year, and you know, they just weren't, our kicks like weren't good this time. And you know, it's hard for me to say, well, we have a really good defense. Like our outfield's really good.
Right,
so while
like
you
haven't
might have
experienced
been,
this.
you haven't seen a good outfield where you've got 3 lockdown players. You know, it's like, while those kicks in the past would have landed, they didn't land today. So, and it's not because they were any different.
And they're not going to land next time either.
Not going to land next time.
Right. Yeah, we also kind of talked about how, you know, we get criticized for sometimes bunting in the 9th inning when we're up. But it's just like, for me, it's more ruthless if you're just bombing home runs over teams that don't really have a great outfield. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it creates more of an even playing field when their best players are in the infield and you're working on your bunting. Meanwhile, you're giving them a chance to field it. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of like a perennial debate. It's actually something we've talked about like on this show, which is like, how should you behave in a game, a board game, typically, when you're like much better than the other person, right? Like, if think about chess, like if you're a chess master and you're playing somebody new at chess, are you supposed to like let them win? Are you supposed to like throw away your pieces?
Take it easy on them,
Take it easy, like maybe there's like maybe like you are doing it as like a teaching exercise or something like that, but in like a competitive game, you know, I'm fully on board what you're saying. Like, you should respect your opponent by playing hard, and hey, maybe after the game you can give them some pointers, some things to work on, and you know, treat them with respect, and which obviously I know y'all do. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's just more something people like complain about, like on a kickball podcast, than it, like anyone really is upset about in the game. That's my take anyway.
Yeah.
All right. What else? Let's see. Let me check my notes for offense. Oh, yeah. All right. So I think another decision that comes up on offense is like running bases, like when to advance. And that is kind of a tricky one, too. So obviously not in like a force situation, but like in a tag up, or when you're like tagging up. So somebody's popped up. Can you advance? Or maybe somebody's kicked a double in the outfield. Like, should you push for home? I think that is another interesting decision, and maybe like one decision point that I think more than any of these others perhaps like separates like the elite teams from like the very good teams.
Right. As far as running, I mean, I think the hardest team to run on is Angela's team, because their pitcher is so quick, and that their team is so good at getting him the ball quickly. And so if you have that scouting report, you have to tell your team, like, hey, like, don't try to get extra bases on this team either, because he'll either have the ball and you can't run once the pitcher's in the diamond with the ball, or he's going to run you down. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So you have to have that scouting report where, as far as like, hey, if it goes to this player in the outfield, they're a great, they can catch really well. They don't have the best arm. So if you see them, if they're past a certain point in the outfield, if you see them, you're tagging up and running. Don't waste that pop fly. Use it. Use that sacrifice. So
yeah. As like a noodle arm outfielder, I'm like really used to that. I was like, all right, go, James, got it. But that, which is also another kind of like.
But you're fast though. You make up for it with your speed. So you catch it and you run it in, which is the smarter thing to do a lot of times. Is just literally run the ball.
Right. And a lot of times people don't realize that even. Like, maybe they're not going to go, like, you're not going to advance when the player catches it, but then they throw kind of like a looper pass into the pitcher, and you leave at that point.
Right.
Like, well, that ball's not going to get here for a few seconds.
Yeah.
I think, so definitely personnel is huge, right? Knowing who's got the ball, who's going to get the ball. Because, arm speed and, like, being able to throw the ball is something that really is, like, there's a tremendous amount of difference, even from like somebody who's just like reasonably athletic and somebody who can like really throw. So that's something to think about, but also the situation. And I think that's another big separator. Even my team last week, we had like a controversial play at home where somebody tried to stretch I think they were on first. Maybe they were trying to go first to home on like a double and got called out sliding in at home. And everyone, I didn't actually see the play, but everybody on our team felt like they were safe.
I saw that play.
With Walker.
Yeah, with Walker. And it's one of those plays where if you're watching it, because the defender had the ball so quickly and low, your mind, at least from my mind, is saying, okay, he's out.
Right.
But maybe if you slowed it down in like an instant replay, like there might be a chance where he like slightly slid underneath it, like where his leg was just like right here and the ball's right here, and then his foot touched.
It's kind of like almost like the instant replay thing.
Yeah.
On in baseball with like people like stealing, they go to the slow mo and it's like they like popped up off the bag for 1 second.
I hate that so much. Where it's just like it's like a little micro jump off the bag, and the tag is still on. I hate it.
But either way, like whether he was safe or out, it's kind of besides the point I was making, which was that like we had one out, right?
So he's going to score.
If he just stops at third, he scores on the next kick anyway. So that's like, just kind of not knowing the situation.
Right.
And maybe, even if he knows the base count, maybe it's just like misinterpreting then like what his odds were of reaching safely. Maybe he thought it was like a 95% and they made a better throw than he was expecting or whatever.
Right.
But that's the kind of thing, that you should be factoring in.
Did you tell, so after that play happened, did you talk to him and say, hey, like next time, like think about the fact that if you stayed at third, we'd have one out and we probably would have scored you, or did you just kind of let it go?
I mean, dude, it's, Walker's like game 2 Walker. He's a little bit toasted at that point. Right, it's probably not going to get through. So, we're talking about it now.
Yeah, so it's like you just use your podcast as like a passive aggressive way. Like, hey, could you check out my podcast?
No.
Listen to this episode. Like,
he's Walker. He's probably been playing kickball longer than like all of us combined. Not quite that much, but
I think I've been in the league longer than him.
Really?
Yeah. All of us combined.
Veteran, very veteran player.
He's great. He also he played Division I football. He was a fucking punter, right?
Yeah, he was a football punter.
Yeah. Jeez. Played for Mangina, the greatest KU football coach of all time.
Okay, so I kind of mentioned that like the base running is something I see as like a big separator. What decision do y'all see as And maybe it's that, maybe something else. Is there like one of these decisions we've talked about thus far that you see as like kind of the biggest separator for teams? Maybe at any level, it could be like separator from teams from like kind of mediocre to good, or from good to great. Is that too complicated of a question?
Well, I think, obviously a lot's going to go into it, but having the optimal defense that you can have, because like we talked about, there's so many different combinations. So being able to find what that optimal defense is, and on the flip side, what your optimal offense is. And I think one of the reasons why our team has been very, very successful is that, we've kept kind of the same lineup for the past, 3 years. We've had the same players. We've had, a couple people join, but they kind of slid right into the role that we had in mind for them. And knowing, what your players are really good at, and knowing where they can benefit on defense and in your lineup, I think is big. So that's something that I see from teams that are maybe struggling a bit more, is failing to see where, their players have the most strengths and how they can help, the team as a whole.
For sure. And I think like the better teams minimize the damage, and the games that we've lost this year, it's just been innings where people are just making kind of boneheaded mistakes. And that boils, when you're as a captain, you really have to stress communication and letting people know, hey, this is your play on this situation, before the play happens. Because otherwise, you have people just thrown all over the place. And I watched you guys play the Ghosts, and for example, and there was a play where the pitcher, she's a great athlete. She's the one who bombed it over your left fielder. Like, she gets the ball, and there's a runner on first and second, and she gets the ball like in the middle of the field, like just in front of the pitcher's mound. And instead of just chest pass to third base, she just throws it to first and like wings it and misses it. So then it's like you miss that lead runner, force out. So I feel like the better teams, it's really those decision makings, and when you don't have every player that, when you have personnel that doesn't really think about those decisions, you need a captain who's just like, hey, if this happens, do this, and then you communicate that before the play happens.
Yeah, I think having a veteran captain is such a huge difference maker for a lot of these teams. Like, I was really impressed by that Home Loans team that you play. That's like a new team in the league.
Me too.
They have some great players, and I like couldn't help but feel like, if I was on that team and like captaining that team, right, I think we'd be like in the top 15 of the league.
That's actually my stepbrother's team, and they, I wanted to help a lot, but it was, he was the captain, and I didn't want to overstep a boundary and be like, hey, here's what your lineup should be, or here, is like how your defense should be. And I think it was good for them to learn, because it took them 7 games to win until they finally won a game. So, they were finally starting to like build that momentum and figure out what was working for them. And, if they do decide that they want to come back, because I think it was kind of a rough year for them. If they do decide that they want to come back, they're going to, I think, be better players for being able to have learned how they got to that point to end up winning 3 or 4 games.
Tough love approach.
Yeah.
Sure. And, so they were in our division, and the first time we played them, it was like 40-2 or 0 or something. I can't remember what it was, but they literally cut that in half to 20. We kind of had a scrambled defense or whatever, but the thing is, like, you could see the huge difference is that the guys who were the best players weren't trying to overstep their role and like try to make all these hero throws. They were just playing within themselves. They were making amazing plays, but then they weren't trying to like stretch it out and make another amazing. They were, getting the ball to the pitcher. You know what I mean? Like just making more sound decisions. So
yeah, like they've seen what happens when they do the other thing.
Exactly.
Absolutely. All right. So there are a couple other kind of just discussion questions that people sent in that I think we have time to get to, if that's all right with y'all.
Yeah.
All right. So I really like this one. So this is from Joe. So how much time do you spend thinking about kickball strategy? And if you do spend quite a bit of time on it, how do you think it helps you on a personal level and on a team level?
Too much.
Yeah.
Too much time.
I cannot sleep Sunday nights. Monday mornings are really rough because, even if I haven't lost the game, I'm still up in bed thinking about like almost every single play that happened, right? And I'm thinking about what could I have done better? Where did we go wrong here? And it helps when you're winning. You know, you don't think about that stuff as much, but I'm definitely all the time, you know, thinking after each game, you know, rehearsing it through my head and trying to improve on it mentally. Do I think it helps?
That's how you get great, I guess. Like, coming from a team that hasn't lost a game all year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps. My sleep's struggling from it this time of year, but I love talking about kickball. That's why anytime I'm asked to be on a podcast, like you asked me to be on a podcast, Simon and I, this is our second podcast this year, and we've done so many together. We just love talking kickball. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm very envious of people like Turtle, you know, like where I feel like he just can play a game and then just, after it's over, just go, yeah, what's up, man? Let's just go hang out. And I'm just like,
gonna continue on with my day.
Yeah. Like, or I just like call him like, hey man, we have a game. Where are you at? Oh, I'm just in the Grand Canyon, man. Just floating down the river. I'm like, sweet, cool. Like sometimes I wish I was just like that laid back, but no, it's just like I think about kickball all the time. And I have a friend. So I work at a high school as a speech pathologist, and one of my good friends was the head soccer coach last year. He was like, hey man, like would you be interested in like being on the coaching staff? And I was just like, you know, as much time as I spend on like thinking about rec sports, it would probably be more like beneficial to like help maybe like an actual high school team, you know, like it'd be more beneficial to put that time and energy into like the youth, you know, but no, instead I'm just stressing over
but you said no.
Yeah.
So you can focus on kickball.
No, I mean I'm definitely interested if you ask me, but yeah.
Well, and I even go as far as to, I watch so much film on kickball, and that is like one of the most nerdy things that I do. I will watch old games from like 2015, 2016, 2017. You know,
you're talking about travel ball,
because that's where it, you know,
where the footage is.
Yeah.
I'd watch KVKL.
I would totally watch KVKL if we had more footage. But they're not edited down, so it's a little bit slower. And that's just, I mean, it's like any sport. You want to get better, you watch the other teams, you watch what good teams do, and I love that shit.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me this year. So I've been like a captain for I think like 3 years, and then I didn't play in 2019. 2020 was called off because of COVID, and then this year I've been the traveling kickball guy. Mm-hmm. So I'm not doing captaining, but just because of, I guess, that sort of position I've had on the team in the past, like people still kind of like look to me as a captain in different situations. Yeah. You know, or like the actual captains will like, oh, what do you think about this lineup?
Right.
And yeah, I think at like my kind of game brain, like that's where I find a lot of like enjoyment, like trying to like innovate and think through new things. Like, you know, I was really convinced that like the soft kick to shortstop was like, oh, I think I just like broke the game, because if I just like kick it really softly to shortstop, I just get on base every single time.
Right.
And then I realized that like there is so much room for error there, because just like hitting it a tiny bit towards the pitcher or a tiny bit towards third, I'm out easy. So I don't even like do that anymore, but wouldn't recommend it. Now I'm back to kicking it hard. But you know, it feels like there's so much room there, and I do think like, you know, I had like my bunting phase where I was like, I'm gonna get really good at bunting. I'm gonna bunt. I don't really do that anymore. But like experimenting, really thinking through like the mechanics of like how to kick a ball well, and kind of trying to like talk to people to share that knowledge is something like that I do because I like to do. I like think about it, and also I think I get a benefit out of that kind of thought process and you know, workshopping. Like if I'm looking at somebody else's kicking mechanics and pointing and like, oh, I'm able to see like, oh, I think like actually what's really important when you want to try and kick the ball down isn't how far your center of mass is leaning over the ball, which is kind of the traditional knowledge that people pass around. And it's really like where the ball is in relation to your plant foot. And if the ball is even or behind it, it's almost impossible to kick it in the air.
Right. And that's what, like, when I went back and read that write-up, because I had read that before when you posted that, that's like what I think one of the most helpful pieces of advice. Just simply put, you want your plant foot to be even with or behind you, and you're not going to pop it up.
Now I try and wait until like I see my knee is like over the ball, like the ball's coming in and like I can't see anymore because my knee is on top of it. And, like that's when I start my swing.
Yeah.
And that's been really successful for me. So yeah, I mean it's that kind of element of it, and the ability to innovate and come up with these new strategies and think through like the differences in defenses. And we're like, oh look, KTC is dominating the league again with a male pitcher. Maybe we should try that after Simon's team like whipped the crap out of us, and that helped. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun, thinking through that kind of like team management decisions.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. Like we talked about before, when you play a team, just play them your best because they'll learn from it. I mean, they will. I don't know. Like, CJ was probably one of the first like kind of male dominant pitchers, and he at the beginning of that season, 2012, we had a female pitcher, and she was kind of there a little bit just more for the social side of it, whatever. And she missed a game while she was gone. We were like, hey, let's put CJ at pitcher. We'll move Richard to third. And we just everything clicked, and we were like, oh shit, we're unstoppable now. Like we went from the 7th seed to like winning the championship just because we made that change. So I mean, it's one of those things where when you see it and it works, I mean, you got to just stick with it.
Yeah.
So
and it depends on personnel too.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. I'm looking through if there's any other kind of questions that I definitely want to hit. One of the questions is, are there any kickball variants that you like? So I think maybe one thing that would be lost on the people listening to this podcast is just the KVKL style of kickball, as you mentioned at the very beginning,
right,
is very different from the type of kickball that's being played in your city or basically anywhere else in the world. So typically, I think like a 9-inch ball is circuit size?
10-inch.
10-inch.
It's 10-inch, but I feel like it's more compact than like the Waka ball somehow. It's supposedly the same size, but I feel like it's just...
It seems small.
Tighter, yeah.
And the KVKL one is 8.5
8.5
inches. So it's a smaller ball, and we don't play with balls and strikes. So kind of the standard is you just wait as a kicker until you get a pitch that you like. So because of that, people roll slow, smooth pitches, ideally, to kind of speed the game along, because assholes like me and Simon will just wait there for 10 minutes if we have to.
It's just being smart.
Yeah, right.
And then
optimal play.
Right. And the bunt line's shorter than most leagues. So usually the defense can't go past from first to third. Like in travel kickball, you can't go past that until the ball's kicked. Whereas in KBKL, it's basically halfway. And the catcher can't move.
Yeah. So there are a few differences. Yeah. I think both are super fun.
Right.
I love both. What I do like, and I think this is why the league has grown so much and there's so many people that can enjoy it, is that when you don't have competitive pitching like that, it's a chance to really include everyone, because when you look at the really competitive pitching in like a traveling league, or, even just different ones that call balls and strikes, if you're not totally just dick pitching, you can strike out so easily. It's like, and your odds of just getting on base were removed dramatically.
Yeah.
Plus, it's only 5 innings for those games.
Yeah.
It's just like, you might kick one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also play on dirt in most other leagues. In St. Louis that I've played in are all on grass or turf.
Yeah.
So that's another difference, which I think is, like, dirt. I like playing on dirt. It's fun. And I think, like, when you bring in, like, hardcore pitching where people are throwing, like, fast overhand, like, you almost have to make that concession to play on grass, because otherwise those balls will be coming at like 60 miles an hour or something.
Oh, right.
Kansas City League, do they have?
Yeah, so there's a Wednesday league in Kansas City where they use our size ball, and there's balls and strikes, and it's on dirt. And I'm just like, wow.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
And like overhand pitching? Like
I think maybe, I guess I don't know that part of it, because
I think that's the difference between circuit, like 365, and a lot of the other kind of Waka leagues, where in the 365, the super hardcore traveling, you can throw it overhand, and then the other ones you have to like roll it underhand. You could still roll it like really fast and hard underhand.
So I've kind of gone like back. So like when I first started playing, everything was on grass, And then we moved to dirt. I was like, oh yeah, this is the right way to do it. It's very uniform. It makes everything easier. You're not going to sprain your ankle. But like as I've gotten older, though, I've realized like after playing like tournaments in 365, like my joints hurt less. You know,
Yeah.
like the grass just gives you like a nice little cushion. And I don't know. I do kind of miss the variety of fields. Like I would love to have, because there used to be seasons where we'd play like. It'd be like the grass week, and we would all play on grass. And I thought that was really fun.
Yeah.
And it would like make these upsets happen too. You know, like, these teams are just like, oh, I don't know how to play on grass. The other team's like, well, we do, you know, like. So it would just create these like, you know, variants, which that makes me think of Loki. I don't know if you guys have watched that show.
Oh yeah.
That's all I think of when I hear variants.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, but I think to your point, Angela, like I completely agree that like. If we think about kickball as a gateway kind of sport, the way that the KVKL does it with like no balls and strikes is the way to go. And I wish that like places could pick up this style of game and at least present that as like an option.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just really convinced that if, you know, I play with some really great players in St. Louis who do the same 365 traveling stuff as with Angela. And I'm just convinced, like, if they had the opportunity to play this, like, they would have the best time.
Definitely.
Because, you know, you can kick the ball harder and further. You can also, like, do better things on defense by throwing it, like, faster and more accurately.
Right.
So, yeah, hopefully, you know, I'm really trying to, like get in with, like, the kickball movers and shakers in St. Louis. And, like, I want to set up, like, a charity tournament or something to just try it out and see. Because, like you're saying, like, everybody's like, how do we get fans and crowds like they have in Lawrence in this, you know, relatively small town?
36 teams, you know, and how many players per roster?
It's like, well, maybe you should try this rule set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, I think that's pretty much it for the discussion questions. Do you guys have any final thoughts? Any final, like, selling points for why board gamers should hop on the kickball bandwagon and have some fun?
I think that it rewards experience and it rewards creativity, and I think that that's what board games are all about. Like once you figure out a game and you figure out how to like get the basics down, then you can kind of work within those deeper levels, you know. And that's kickball's all about that too.
Yeah, I would agree. And you know, I've played a lot of game nights with Jake, and most of the people at the game night were also fellow kickballers, and so I do think that there is, if you enjoy kind of thinking about things in odds or situationally, or you know, just different strategies. I mean, all of that and competitiveness goes into kickball and board games. So I would definitely give it a try and meet new people, and it's a lot of fun.
Totally agree with both of you. I think, you know, when I play games, I'm thinking about the same kind of things that we talked about throughout this conversation. Like, so to your point, Angela, like, what is the percentage that if I make this throw to third, I'll be able to get the out versus this percentage of going to first? Like, what is the optimal play? I'm searching for that. I'm thinking through creative new lines of play. And I think, you know, somebody who's really good at strategy and tactics in a game is going to be able to apply that to a game of kickball. You know, maybe not in your first game, but if in, you know, over time, and if you're really willing to like to think about what you're doing out there, that can give you an edge over somebody who maybe is even more like athletic.
Definitely.
You know, who's been playing kickball longer. If you're doing the right play more often, that is really rewarded in a game of kickball where it's really, you know, it's not soccer or basketball that's just constant play. Like, we are really taking turns and just trying to do the most in any one play. That's it. Thank you so much, Angela, Simon, for joining. I hope you guys had fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course.
If you enjoyed this conversation, want to learn more about kickball, you can find more discussion about it on our Discord with a link in the show notes. And we're on Twitter and all that. So thanks for listening.
You are now exiting the decision space. Thanks for listening. Please take care and enjoy the rest of your game.